All right. Welcome to Politics After Dark with Rachel. That's me. Hello, everybody. I hope somebody is out there watching. I have with me Norm Singleton. He is currently a vice president over at Campaign for Liberty, or is it the vice president? Is there only one?
Actually, I'm the only vice president right now.
There can be only one. It's like the Highlander, right?
Right.
So, okay. But the reason Norm is joining me tonight for Politics After Dark is because he was a colleague of mine when I was on Capitol Hill working in Ron Paul's office. As I was the press secretary, Norm was the legislative director. But he was in the office for a total of 15 years. I was only there for 5. So tonight we're going to talk about what it was like to work on Capitol Hill for Dr. Paul in those very interesting years up until he retired. But now I am going to go to our chat room over at Liberty.me and see what's going on over there. Yeah. Okay, I see our guest room. We have guest John, guest Kelvin, a bunch of guests. That's always good.
Is Hobbs there?
What?
You said Calvin. I asked us if Hobbs was there.
As in Calvin and Hobbs.
Yes, for those new younger people, Calvin and Hobbs was a wonderful comic strip from the 80s, 90s.
Yeah, that's sad. I was a big fan of Calvin and Hobbs. But actually, it's Calvin, and when people sign in as a guest, they get randomly assigned a name just to be more friendly. It's strange like that. But anyway, if you're a guest, you get assigned, and it doesn't care about gender. So people get named really weird things when they're in the chat room as a guest. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I always used to tell people, well, I still tell people that 2 things necessary to survive a legislative government environment like Capitol Hill as a libertarian, 2 things: low expectations and a sense of humor. Would you agree with that, Norm?
Certainly low expectations and a sense of humor can help. Also a sense of, I don't know if it's different than humor, but irony.
Mm-hmm.
And also one of the things that it still strikes me as odd or as interesting is that, in our office, starting with Ron himself, we took our principles, our ideas, and our mission to serve as a beacon of what the system should be in terms of elected officials who take liberty, free market economics, peace, and limited government seriously, abiding by the Constitution in all areas. Very seriously, but we didn't take ourselves seriously. None of us, we all had, good senses of humor. A lot of other offices and a lot of other staffers, it's the opposite. They don't take principles seriously. They don't take ideas seriously. They don't even take legislation seriously, but they take themselves very seriously.
That is true. That is a good way to put it.
A lot of them, it seemed like they actually kind of enjoyed the security theater that kept getting worse and worse after 9/11. And remember, even when you, in your 5 years there from 07 to 12, security theater kept getting worse and worse. And a lot of these staffers enjoyed it because it made them, it reinforced their sense of self-importance, that I am so important that I deserve to be harassed by the Capitol Hill police when I try to come to work in the morning, because it shows that I need extra special protection because I'm
special
to the country.
I'm an important target.
Well, of course, a lot of them were special, but not necessarily.
What are you drinking tonight, Norm?
This is coffee.
Coffee?
Yes, I don't have any alcohol with me, unfortunately.
But it's 9:30. You can't drink coffee at night, Norm. How are you expect to sleep?
You'd be surprised.
So you sleep well at night?
I do. I lay awake counting Republican presidential candidates. That's how I drift off to sleep.
That's awesome. So let's see. Is there anyone in the chat room that's got a question coming up? I've got a bunch of questions that came up on Facebook written down, but let me see. I think people in chat room who are joining us live should get priority. Mike Reed is asking, did the other politicians and bureaucrats loathe small government guys who didn't appreciate the security theater? So yeah, just about the attitude of the other people. What do you think?
You know, it's tough because there's that phony collegiality in DC. I'm sure anybody who's watched C-SPAN has noticed that no matter how clearly it is that politicians really don't like each other, they insist on beginning every statement with "my good friend" or "I have great respect for the gentleman," and then their next few words are "he's completely wrong." So yeah, sometimes you can tell, and we would hear stories every so often about. I remember there was one committee chairman in particular that at a Christmas party. This was in 2001, and it was the over the terrorism insurance bill. The then chairman of the Financial Service Committee, apparently at a meeting with a bunch of outside groups, had screamed that their opposition to it showed that they were just going to be like Ron Paul and just make points and not get anywhere in this. This gentleman, who was a friend of mine, said, you know, this guy doesn't really like your boss. And my response was to just say, well, you know, I understand that. We're not here to be liked by statists. We're here to be liked by people who like liberty.
Yeah, that's true. Guest Erna is asking, how does Ron Paul feel about what is happening with the Bernie Sanders phenomenon? That's an interesting question, because Bernie Sanders was with us on some issues. He was one of those guys that we actually built coalitions with on was it the Federal Reserve? What was it?
Audit the Fed. He was with us for a while. He did at the end cave in to Chris Dodd and Harry Reid and support a really watered down version of it that ended up in Dodd-Frank. He's okay on civil liberties. The big thing that Ron and him used to work together on when he was in the House was XM Bank and other forms of corporate welfare. And I'm glad to see that even though Elizabeth Warren and the rest of the left has kind of caved in on that issue, Bernie has stuck to his guns. I've just heard Ron make one or two offhand comments on his Liberty Report and other areas about how interesting it is that there's a socialist surging to the top in the Democratic primary, and then in the other party's primary, Ron is referred to a strongman authoritarian seeming to surge to the top, and how both of these are kind of disappointing signs in terms of the American people's appetite for liberty.
Yeah. I can imagine he would be a little bit depressed right now, not just because Rand's performance is not what we were hoping for at this stage, but just because of who is doing well. Oh, depressing. Let's see. Guest John is asking if you worked you worked during the campaigns in 08 and 12, and so did I. And you probably did a lot more work with the campaigns than I did. I tried to maintain, well, I mean, I worked with the campaign on scheduling and logistics, but what sort of stuff did you do with the campaign?
In 08 and more formalized in 012, I basically worked on policy issues, putting together coordinating coordinated and wrote a lot of the budget plan, the one that shut down 5 cabinet agencies, and answered questions, helped with media things, and helped make sure that everyone on staff had some basic understanding of Ron's positions on various issues.
Which was important. Just logistics wise, to make sure everyone's on the same page, campaign and congressional office and all of that, make sure it all lines up with Ron's views.
If you're hearing the who in the background, that's my cell phone going off. Let me go.
Oh, okay. You need to take a call. He needs to take a call. Let's see. Quite a few libertarians seem quite taken by the Donald, or at least have an outside fascination with him. I think the fascination with, yeah, it's Ron on the phone, probably is. I think the whole Donald Trump thing is just, people can't believe that he just said that. I couldn't believe that he said what he said about McCain and he's like still alive and kicking. Yeah. And I mean, I thought he was toast after that. It was like, oh, he just insulted all POWs. Goodbye. But no.
Well, he also said, what I found very interesting is he said that he will raise taxes on himself and the rest and other rich people.
Oh, people love to hear that, though.
Yeah, of course, the problem with that is that first, the problem is government spending, and secondly, raising taxes on the rich never actually works as a deficit reducer because Congress spends the money.
Yeah. Yep, and they'll spend as much as they get. So it's not like they're going to cut somewhere. They're gonna spend as much as they can.
I mean, we've had interesting presidential years before. Actually, 07 and 08, that cycle was incredibly fascinating to watch, both as a participant, seeing Ron explode as a national figure, all these new people being introduced to the ideas of liberty,
yeah.
Groups coming out afterwards, not just C4L, but YAL, SFL. But then on the other side of it, this guy from Illinois with a strange name, Barack Hussein Obama, a name that kind of reminded a lot of people when they first heard of Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden, do what nobody thought was possible, which is dethrone Hillary.
Yep.
He also kind of tapped into, though, a vein of dissatisfaction with the establishment politicians, with the warfare state, and with traditional politics. And of course, Ron has gone on, both in his remaining time in Congress, his subsequent presidential campaign, and his activities since then, to continue to try to build a movement and an intellectual and spread the ideas of liberty. Obama was really a big disappointment, not to me because I didn't expect much from him, but to all those libertarians who in 08 said, well, on economics, he's probably going to be slightly worse than Bush. That was true.
But at least the wars will end and the drug war will end, and at least all this will happen.
And what we got was a worse version of Bush, although domestically, although except for Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, I'm not really sure that he's passed that much bad legislation. Not that he didn't try, it's that there were enough Republicans and Democrats who either believed that Obama was wrong or feared that the voters understood that Obama was wrong to stop some of his more outlandish schemes.
Well, it's like the who says, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, which sort of echoes the idea that there's a government behind the government that doesn't change. All of the bureaucracies and the agencies and all of that stays in place, for the most part,
yeah.
Even when leadership changes.
And that's also something we saw on Capitol Hill. You have people talk about the permanent bureaucracy having more power than elected officials. That also applies to the permanent staffocracy on Capitol Hill, where you have these 20-somethings running, running congressional offices, and they really don't have real-world experience. They don't have a good philosophical grounding. They don't care about ideas. What they care about is appeasing special interests and then going on to K, so they can go on to K Street, triple their salary, or they get on a committee, and that's where you find the more older, more seasoned staffers, but they're the ones who actually write the laws, and because they're there and you don't know how long a member of Congress is going to serve or how long they're going to want to stay on a certain committee, they actually are able to intimidate members of Congress and the staffers because they have better knowledge and they have connections inside the bureaucracy, and they form alliances with bureaucrats, especially if the White House and the Congress are in the control of the same party. And that's something that, for all the people complain about staffers running things, and that you don't really hear a lot of talk about this permanent infrastructure that empowers staffers, rewards institutional knowledge in committees, staffers, which is the most unaccountable part of Congress.
Yeah.
And the whole system is basically it's basically in a lot of ways built to frustrate people who want to chop down the government, who chop down the size of government.
Yeah. It's depressing. Is there any point to trying then?
Well, I think that it's a long process. It's a slow process, and as Ron says, it has to start with education, getting the people to understand the ideas of liberty. Then when you get that, you can make the system work for us. The key is to do what groups like C4L does, which is pressure them, the members of Congress, into doing the right thing, because self-preservation can be a wonderful motivating factor. If members of Congress get 50 calls a day telling them, vote for audit the Fed, vote against Patriot Act extension, a lot of them will do it, not because they believe in it, but because they fear the consequences. And quite frankly, if the people believe in it, it doesn't really matter if Congress believes in it. Milton Friedman had a wonderful quote, which was, our goal should not be to elect a bunch of good people to office, because there aren't enough good people to do so, and a lot of them will get corrupted when they get to D.C. Our goal should be to control the system, the intellectual and political infrastructure, such that the bad people feel compelled to vote our way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because it is tough to go into Congress as an idealist and stay that way, with all the pressures and all the money flying around and everything. But I mean, you're right. The people have to want it. The people, to some extent, get the government that they deserve. And if they understand the principles of liberty, if they understand how the system works and how to navigate it properly, then they can make a change in their favor.
And that was the great thing about 2008 and 2012, was all of a sudden people who had ignored Ron for years were treating him with respect. They were at least paying lip service to his ideas. You then had the Tea Party, which had a strong libertarian element to it, at least at the beginning, and you had some new members coming in, and it was a complete changeover. And it was all
it wasn't
because these guys watched the debates and were like, wow, I never realized Ron Paul made so much sense before. It was because they would come home to their districts and they would see these huge Ron Paul signs.
Homemade signs.
Right, the homemade signs. They would go to town halls and there would be people saying, well, Ron Paul says that you can be a good Republican and oppose the wars and the spying. In fact, if you're a true fiscal conservative, you'll join Ron Paul in opposing the wars because those are one of our biggest expenditures. And how can you tell me you're going to nickel and dime all these domestic programs to balance the budget and just wall off the warfare state from any cuts? Maybe some of the politicians looked up in the sky and they saw a Ron Paul blimp floating by.
Air Force Ron. Oh, there was so much fun stuff that came out of that, but it really did make a difference. I'm glad you bring that up because, you know, a lot of people feel discouraged right about now that they got so fired up and they did all this work and that it was all for nothing, but it wasn't. It wasn't. You know, the other members of Congress who went back to their district, they noticed, they felt the pressure, and whenever they saw a Ron Paul sign spray painted in somebody's garage in the district, they know what that means. You know, they knew what that meant, and they knew that they better pay attention for self-preservation. You have to use the motivating factors of the members of Congress against them, so to speak.
Well, it also is like I was at Tampa for the 2012 convention, and I sat when they were. I was on the floor when they did the rules change, and afterwards I was sitting in enjoying some liquid refreshments with a few other.
I think a lot of people were enjoying liquid refreshments after that. And
I said to someone, I said, well, you know, if you remember in 2008, they didn't have to change the rules to kick our people out of, to keep our people from taking over the party. They just slammed the door in our face, and we didn't have the numbers, the organizations to really stop them. Although Ron did draw thousands of people to a nice rally in 2008. Just like he did in 2012. But in 2012, we forced the establishment to lie, cheat, and steal to keep us out of power. I mean, I don't want to sound too flippant or too cynical, but that itself is a victory because it means that they saw that we're a threat. And I think that we're still a threat and can be a threat in the future. We need to understand that this is a very long ball game. Liberty wasn't lost in a day, and it won't be reclaimed in a day, won't be reclaimed with one campaign. Ron himself never said that I'm the silver bullet. And there'll be setbacks and frustrations along the way. But I think that the important thing is to continue to stay active, stay involved, do what you can to spread the message in whatever way you feel is important.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it doesn't matter who your congressman is. If all of this is true, if you put the pressure on them to preserve themselves by voting for liberty, it doesn't matter who's in office if they feel the heat. So we only have like 5 minutes, and I've got all of these questions. One thing that I was really interested in, let's see, who asked this about 9/11? Somebody asked, Ez Van Auken asked, were you on Ron's staff during 9/11? I was not. I came in 2007, but you were. And he's asking, what was it like what was that day like on Capitol Hill?
Well, actually, we were all about it, and so on 9/11 itself, nobody was around Capitol Hill. The next days and weeks, I think it was very somber. It was very serious. Our office, we did a lot of thinking and looking towards the future with a lot of trepidation. One of the things that Ron did in his statement after 9/11.
I'll be right back. Keep talking. I'll be right back.
Okay, I'll be right here. He was one of the first members to, I think actually the first member of Congress, to say that we should not allow this terrorist attack to be used as an excuse to take away civil liberties protections. Nobody seemed to really listen. And one thing too is we did a lot of waiting to see what the response would be and if it was something that would comply with the Constitution. We looked at several alternatives that were floated that were just insane. One that basically would have had the United States government declare war anywhere in the world against any terrorist attack. Ron did end up voting for the authorization of force, and I've since then I've reread it a couple times, and interestingly, the language of that Ron voted for only authorized the government to go after those responsible for 9/11. It did not authorize a 15-year war against in Afghanistan to do whatever it is they're doing over there now. It did not authorize the Patriot Act. It did not authorize torture. It did not. It was a very limited grant of power, and I think that this is chalk this up to yet another failure of Congress to exert its authority in foreign policy and matters of war and peace. That 2 presidents now have been allowed to use this narrow grant of force to justify all sorts of crazed power grabs.
Yeah, that's very disturbing. Really quick, I have to ask this from Mike Reed. He he wants to know. There's constant speculation about whether Ron Paul is really an anarcho-capitalist in the closet. Is he an anarcho-capitalist in disguise or an authentic constitutionalist? What would you say to that? I would say no. I would say he's not really an ANCAP. He really is a minarchist. What would you say?
I would say he's a minarchist, although I think he believes that we don't. Although he does, I know, believe in devolution to very smallest units of government. He's, for example, last year he wrote in favor of Scottish succession, the Scottish succession movement, and he was a great friend and an admirer of Murray Rothbard.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not unsympathetic to that point of view, but I don't think he is
a closet ANCAP.
Closet ANCAP. I think he's very, but he is, though, again, very
like minarchist in the most extreme sense.
I think he's very friendly to that point of view, because a lot of the scholars and activists and writers that he admires do come from that tradition.
Well, I'm of the opinion, and I think he probably is too, that if we get more ANCAP type pressure in the media and social sphere, if there's more of that pressure, it will only serve to steer the boat in the right direction. Yeah, right. I don't think there's any danger that they're going to get their way and abolish all government, but it's only steering us in a positive direction. So more power to them.
Right. I think it's a very helpful to have as many libertarians of as possible, and quite frankly, I don't necessarily spend a lot of time worrying about the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist. I would very much actually like to live in a world where the competing political philosophies versus Rothbardians, because basically that would mean that we've won most of the great issues facing us today.
Yeah, that would be good. Where that fight really mattered.
I will state for the record, for myself, on most of these issues, my sympathies lie with Murray. As I consider myself a Rothbardian, and people can interpret that regarding the question as they wish. But Ron keeps me around, so there you go.
Well, it's because you're brilliant. Let's see. Oh, this is an interesting question. Rocco Lucente asked, was there ever a political thought Congressman Paul took into consideration while voting on legislation, or was it always pure policy?
It was all, yeah.
I think it would be unfair to say he didn't understand the political ramifications and that they weren't a consideration, but he always voted on principle.
What the politics came into it was more of a messaging. You know, we spent, as you remember, we spent a lot of time when there was controversial votes figuring out
Yeah.
how do we message this correctly so that Ron's point is clear and so that people understand and can sympathize with what he's doing. And that was, you know, part of Ron's mission was to sell the philosophy of liberty.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that to your own constituents, how can you do that nationwide? Um,
Yeah. Specifically, I remember the flood insurance votes being tough, just
yeah,
because his district is on the Gulf of Mexico. So, you know, there were hurricanes that would come through and cause a lot of damage, and then he'd have to vote against flood insurance.
right, right. And of course, as you remember, after Ike,
Yeah.
there was a lot of people upset that he voted against. For those of you who don't remember, Ike was a hurricane that hit in '08.
That was a big deal in our
Right,
office,
right,
especially.
right before the stock market crashed. Actually, in between the rally for the Republic and the stock market crash, we had a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that did a lot of damage in Galveston. Ron voted against the aid package, got a lot of heat from it back home. You know, he explained his position. Then 6 months later, people started coming into our office and saying, "I was really mad at you when you voted against that aid package, but FEMA has been doing such a crappy job in cleaning up
Yeah.
Galveston. There's still trash in front of my house that they said 3 months ago was going to be removed tomorrow. That you're right. We'd be better off if government just left us alone and let us clean this stuff up themselves." And of course, the other part of that story is a lot of times we had a lot of people call up and say, "I told the federal government, don't come to my street because I'm just going to go out and clean and pick up myself, and I can handle it myself." And they were told, "Oh, you can't do that. Federal law says it has to be done by a federal official, and if you do
Mm-hmm.
that, we're gonna fine you."
Yeah, it really sucks that it is the case that FEMA really made Ron's point for him, and it took them actually being incompetent.
And as you remember, because it was when your phone was blowing up after
Yeah.
the bailout. The bailout made Ron's point for him, and all of a sudden, all the financial networks, CNBC and all the rest, were calling us every 5 minutes because
Yeah.
he went back and said, "That guy from Texas that we were laughing at him 6 months ago when he was telling us that this was going to happen. Maybe we should have him on now and treat him with a little more respect since he
Yep.
was right and we were all wrong."
Yep. Yep. I remember that. I was very busy during that time. Do you have 5 more minutes? What do you think? Do you need to go?
Yeah.
I remember a moment of mine. I'll just tell a personal story about the bailout since you brought it up. The moment where I really became truly, truly cynical. Truly cynical. I came in sort of bright-eyed and optimistic and idealistic like everybody does.
And then I beat that out of you.
No, then the bailouts happened, and the thing is, when all of the debates and the negotiations were happening on the floor, the emails and the phone calls came in, not just to our office, but to every office, like 85, 90% against. The people were speaking out. They were putting the pressure on their representatives not to agree to these bailouts and all this stuff. And then it was October, and they did it anyway. They passed it anyway, in spite of everything their constituents were screaming at them about. And then I thought, well, November, elections around the corner. These people are going to get their butts handed to them. It's going to be a mass exodus. They'll see. They'll learn. They'll see. And only one or two of them lost their seats. Nothing happened.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, it was a shame. what people don't remember about that is that was actually the birth of the Tea Party movement. It wasn't birth. It wasn't anything Obama did as president. It was actually Bush, and
Yeah.
the results of that were. And I agree with you. It was a shame that there weren't more casualties at the ballot box in '08 over that, because that was an outrage. And if you remember, what was really outrageous was you had members of Congress publicly saying on the floor that you should ignore your constituents because they don't understand that we need to do this. So you had George Bush saying, "I had to kill the free market system in order
To
to
save it. Yeah. Let's find one more, and then we better wrap it up. Um, Here. What is the most tense moment you can remember Ron going through in Congress in terms of opposing the leadership? Any good stories regarding confrontations between him and the leadership?
um
Confrontations?
I mean, Ron is a very nice, gentlemanly man, and he stuck to his principles, but he did it in a way that he was never like screaming at Newt or Hastert or Boehner or any of those guys. I think probably there were a few times on the floor where individual members would be mad because Ron was, and it's weird that it bothered them so much. It was always so-called conservative Republicans, and that may be why this was the case. I think there was one of these gold medal bills where Ron was the only member to vote against it, and the conservative, so-called conservative member who was sponsored it came up and really screamed at Ron. There were other cases like that. As far as leadership, they knew Ron. They knew Ron from the very beginning wasn't going to go with them, and eventually they stopped even trying
Mhm.
to get him. I think
Yeah, and I mean the truth is he was only one vote, so they probably just began to understand
right.
where to put him in the mathematical calculations and just write him off. But if there were 10, if there were 10 like him,
Well, we see that today
yeah,
because of Ron's efforts. Now there are members like Thomas Massey, Justin Amash, and others who are actually able to stop the leadership from doing what they want.
that's
And
right.
I mean that the one vote was significant because it showed that there was another way. It showed that the Constitution actually meant something, and that liberty actually meant something to at least one person up there.
Hmm.
And again, I think the fact that Ron was consistent and stuck by his principles all times, it wasn't his intent, but I think the effect was to shame a lot of these guys who want to think of themselves as, oh, I'm a constitutionalist conservative, but here's a guy who actually votes for liberty in all areas. He doesn't make exceptions, and he doesn't compromise to go along or strike some deal. And I'm trying to think if there was a particular confrontation or issue we had with leadership. They played petty games every so often. The big thing was that monetary policy chairmanship that Ron finally got in 2011. He should have gotten that at least a decade
Yes.
beforehand. And I
Yes.
know because I was told by more than one staffer that the the reason he didn't get it, the reason they did things like they used to have a domestic and international monetary policy subcommittee, those were combined into one, and that was done specifically to make it easier for the chairman to deny Ron a chairmanship. Um, and then in 2011, he got that chairmanship, and it was basically because they didn't see a way of denying it to him without creating a ruckus they didn't want with what is still the fastest and maybe the only growing wing of their coalition.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and even then, when Ron had the chairmanship, I think there was a lot of little petty games that were being played, not necessarily by the committee leadership, but or at their behest, but more going above that because they didn't like Ron questioning monetary policy. They certainly didn't like him question foreign policy. And I think what a lot of conservatives and even some self-described libertarians really found objectionable about Ron on foreign policy is that he was not he was Dennis Kucinich's exact opposite when it came to issues like healthcare, um, gun control, abortion. And so here's this guy who's everything that Republicans are supposed to adore: free market, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, family man, wonderful husband and father, but he's actually more anti-war than most Democrats, and I think that really is what is why Ron drives the neocons and the GOP establishment crazy. It's not just that he's anti-war; it's that he's an anti-war guy who, on a lot of the big issues, is sounder than they are on what Republicans are supposed to believe in.
Yeah.
I think it's the way Ron put it together in that package, which I think is his greatest contribution to American political life, is making the unified theory of liberty, which or libertarianism, putting that into the mainstream. And I think that's one of his greatest accomplishments, one of his greatest attractions. But I think that's also what bothers so many of his detractors who want
to be dictators. Yeah. Well, maybe we should leave it there for now. We didn't get to everybody's questions, and some people in the chat room are frustrated. Maybe, Norm, we should do a part 2 of this in a few months. What would you say to that? Would you come back?
Yeah, I would certainly come back.
Cool.
If you'll have me.
Yeah. I would love to have you on every now and then, just to comment on just whatever we're talking about, whatever news of the day there is. So I hope you'll come back.
Alrighty. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
I miss working with you.
I miss working with you too.
I miss you. But yeah, it was great to have you on the show. And I hope you sleep well with all that coffee.
I'm sure I will. I want to thank everybody at Liberty.me who listened to this. And I hope, and I also want to give a shout out to my old friend Jeffrey Tucker.
Oh, Jeffrey, yeah.
Hope he's doing well, and hope his bow tie collection is in good condition.
It is. I can attest to that. I saw him in Atlanta a few weeks ago. But before we go, I have to mention 2 other shows that are coming up. We have Let's Talk Left Libertarianism with Lucy Steigerwald, Sheldon Richmond, and Walter Block. That is going to be Friday, tomorrow at 9 o'clock here on Liberty Live. And also, Tuesday, September 8th, we're going to have Godfrey Bloom talking Liberty in Europe with the Bitcoin couple. That should be interesting. That's at 2 p.m. Tuesday, September 8th, so that's middle of the day. I guess they're on European time. So don't forget to watch those. And thank you so much for joining me. And thank you, Norm. And if we didn't get to your question, we'll do a part 2 here in a little while. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.